Hello, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ethan Chazen. I am a New York-based business growth coach, and I wanted to take a little bit of time today to share some of my effective strategies on how do you not avoid conflict, but how do you actually embrace conflict in order to unleash your people's collaborative work, performance, and productivity. You see, most organizations, most individuals have a very certain myopic or limited view of conflict, meaning it's inherently damaging and destructive, and thus it should be avoided. My contention is conflict is neither good nor bad in and of itself. In fact, I would say that conflict is of critical value or can be of critical value and importance in your organization for helping you to allow your people to unleash their untapped potential when it comes to working together in terms of critical thinking, problem solving, and being creative in their approach to driving your business forward. So let's dive into what conflict is, what it's not, and how you can actually leverage it for success for your employees, for your teams. So the first thing is to understand that once you get in life, in the human dynamic, two or more people, excuse me, I'm getting all choked up, two or three people together, conflict comes naturally. It's part of human interaction. So we start with, in my training and development, I start with the concept that conflict already exists. So therefore, it shouldn't be avoided. It should be leveraged to optimal positive impact. So the first thing to understand is what's your style? When you have two or more people coming together, what's your preferred communication method based on your personality, your preferred way of interacting with other people? And that's why it often helps to do an assessment up front for your team. I am DISC certified as a coach, which is just like Myers-Briggs, a psychology assessment tool based on the work done by Carl Jung. But you should give your team the opportunity to understand what their own personal preferred style of communication is, and also the fellow team members. This is one of the greatest gifts that you can give your team to allow them to approach working together most effectively. So that's the first thing that I would suggest. And I often do as part of my work with teams and businesses that want to grow. The first thing we do is unleash everybody's understanding, get to a consensus of their understanding of what they and their peers are most likely to feel comfortable in their communication style. So we have to find opportunity in conflict. That's the point of today's webinar, today's training video. So we understand that we don't always create conflict in our lives, and especially at work, but we do get to choose ultimately how we respond to it. That's the point of this training seminar, is that you absolutely, as an individual, as a team, as an organization, can choose how you engage conflict, not to run from it, not to attempt to hide it, but the meaningful attempt to approach it head on with an understanding of it is a tool in interpersonal relationship for coming to a greater consensus. So one exercise you can do is a you said, but I heard exercise. So you get the team together and you have one team member start by making a statement. Then another team member will basically have to verbalize, summarize their interpretation or understanding of their peer statement. So they say, you said, when will I have the report ready? But what I heard you say is you are too slow in your work. So then the first speaker is given the opportunity to respond and react to that statement of their fellow peer. And they can say, well, you heard me say you're too slow at your job. But what I meant to say, what I was really attempting to communicate with you, is that I'm stressed out, that I need the information that I'm counting on receiving from you to be able to present to my boss or my bosses on time. So the "you said, I heard" exercise is a really powerful tool when people are not necessarily understanding each other, or that they've not effectively heard what the other is saying, because that gets to something else I often train and coach in teams, which is active listening. Because most often conflict arises from a lack of genuine understanding or processing of messages that we all send. So sometimes I'm brought in after an event has already occurred, obviously, and there's conflict that already exists amongst fellow team members. And it's based on something that happened previously. So you gather folks together and you ask for folks to share their perception of what happened. So what's needed is a really effective facilitation. And oftentimes I've found that a manager, even if she or he, they want to facilitate meaningful conversation, that they may not know how to do it. So that's typically why you would bring in somebody like myself, who excels in coaching teams and conducting employee training and development. So what you want to do is remove the stigma of negative labels. So when you're focused on a story in a team environment of what happened, so you really want to get to the root cause of what happened, what escalated the situation, because clearly sometimes the conflict has nothing to do with the initial interaction, but the way it's perceived, the misunderstanding or the lack of active listening. And so things spiral, right? And so you want to get to also, how is the issue resolved? And typically resolution is not effective, which is why you have lingering conflict. And then you also want to get to a conversation with team members around what did I or other members of the team do that was successful, and what did I learn? And that requires a level of professionalism vis-a-vis maturity. That a lot of times we get so emotionally engaged in the process of the interaction of the conflict that we can't objectively step back and say, what did I learn from that? And that's something else that I'm typically asked to coach and train on in teams. When you get conflict right, it's the leverage or the lack of understanding of something called emotional intelligence. And so you also have to, concurrently with conflict, addressing the conflict, you also have to navigate the emotions that come into play. So typically, as I said before, I'm brought in after the fact. The conflict has already occurred. So what you want to do is, with the benefit of time and maybe some opportunity where folks have kind of separated from the conflict situation and had an opportunity to themselves do their own personal debrief, you have them share the story of what they perceive happened. And then at the end of each of them sharing their story, other team members are allowed to weigh in and give praise and constructive feedback, suggest other ways that each of them or the whole team could have handled the conflict to resolve the issue. And again, this requires a deft hand, a very skilled facilitation, which is why often it helps to take some of that emotional charge out of the room by bringing in somebody who's ostensibly perceived to be more objective, meaning an outsider who doesn't have history. So what we're really doing is, it's called image exchanging. And in my facilitation work, that's a key component of letting other people see what your perspective is, because that's what's missing often in the objective resolution of conflict, is how I see myself and the baggage I bring in to any relationship with somebody who's a peer, who may not know me well, or maybe I don't necessarily believe that they trust me or that they share my interests. How I see myself is what I carry into every relationship. And then therefore, how you see me is also important. What's the intersection? We want there to be common ground between how I see myself and how you see me. And that is often a really powerful undertow, or a really powerful, maybe non-communicated kind of set of parameters around how people are set up to succeed or not succeed in teams. Often we talk about, oh, you must collaborate. The future of work is collaboration, but we really don't ever address how I see myself and how you see me. We need to have common ground to have meaningful exchange. That's powerful. So let's just, I want to wrap up the video. I didn't want it to be too long, but I wanted to set a framework for when is appropriate as an organization to identify the conflict exists and therefore the need to bring in an outside expert like myself to facilitate the resolution of conflict in order to gain, in order for individuals to benefit and the team to benefit. The understanding is that there's no one scenario for conflict. Actually, there are 4 situations in which conflict exists. None is better than the other in the abstract. They're all situations which are situationally appropriate or inappropriate. So let's walk through each of the 4 scenarios. The first is called competing or forcing. And what that is, it's a zero-sum game situation. I win, you have to lose. There can only be one winner here or one beneficiary of the conflict. We don't share it. So in this scenario of competing, it's appropriate when we're in an emergency situation and we therefore need to make a quick decision and we do not have time to deliberate or have a democratic participative process of debate or Socratic method of back and forth. The issue may be trivial to one or more of the parties, and they therefore don't care what happens, which makes them more amenable to being the loser in that scenario. But again, that's win-lose when it's situationally appropriate. But when is it inappropriate? We know that forcing another to a lose situation is inappropriate when what we really want to do is benefit from collaboration and relationship cultivation. If we know that we're going to work together with these other individuals on an ongoing basis, and we need to collaborate to come up with the broadest range of suitable solutions and critical thinking and creative problem solving, we know that it's inappropriate to force somebody else to feel like they're losing because we want to cultivate the relationship. So that's competing forcing, win, lose. But there are, again, 4 situations. So the next one is the opposite of win-lose. It's actually called accommodation, or I lose, you win. So when is it appropriate? The issue doesn't matter to me. I'm ambivalent about the outcome. I don't have any skin in the game. I don't have a vested interest in the outcome. However, what I really do care about is cultivating a meaningful relationship so that in the future we can work together effectively. So that's when an accommodation or lose-win strategy is situationally appropriate. When is it inappropriate? Far too often, people who are from a personality perspective servant masters, they live to serve others, they're most often likely to go to an accommodation strategy. But what we don't talk about when I do a lot of conflict resolution and team building is that it's inappropriate to approach relationships and conflict through an I'll lose so that you win, as if I'm going to be resentful. If we need to work together in the future and I'm really upset with how I felt, you made me have to take a lose position, I'm going to harbor resentment towards you in the future. And that's not conducive to a mutually beneficial, lasting relationship. So that's when accommodation is inappropriate. But I mentioned there's 4 strategies. So we've done win-lose, we've done lose-win. And now what we're going to do is when people think of conflict and they typically bring me in, there's a false assumption that we're always going to get to collaboration as the third of 4 situations. Look, why can't everybody win? Why can't we have a proverbial relationship cake and eat it too? But you don't always get to collaboration. But let's talk about what win-win is all about. When is it situationally appropriate or beneficial? When the issue is critically important to multiple parties. That's when you need to go in with the mindset of whenever possible, can we achieve true win-win collaboration? And or not only is the situation critically important, but the relationships are of primary importance. we have to pursue cooperation because it's ultimately meaningful to the long-term relationships that we're effectively cultivating in our organization. If we work in a team that demands by necessity creative thinking, critical thinking, the maximization of potentially suitable solutions to problems. All of that dictates that we have to typically approach a more collaborative win-win approach. But when is it inappropriate, right? Because again, when we think of conflict, what's the word that comes right after conflict in our minds? What's the word game? Conflict resolution. We always have to resolve it at any cost, get rid of it. But when is this inappropriate, this win-win? Well, again, time is short, time is of the essence. We need a decision made quickly, and or one or more of the parties in this interpersonal dynamic, they don't stand to benefit from the outcome. The results aren't important to them, so they don't necessarily need to be catered to the extent that we have to go out of our way to find suitable win-wins for all parties. So that's when collaboration as a conflict resolution strategy is not appropriate. So we've done three. I said there are four. So the remaining solution or scenario, which has merit from a conflict resolution perspective, is what we call avoidance. Avoidance is one or more parties, they all, quote unquote, lose. And the situational constructs in which avoidance are appropriate or a suitable solution is when the results don't matter to everybody. It's just, we have to get this done. Head down, drive forward. The relationships may not matter in long-term collaboration. This may be a one-time deal, a one-time situation which you need to get closure, solution, accomplish the task, move on. And in that case, avoidance or lose-lose is appropriate, right? But avoidance and lose-lose is not always a desirable approach. It's not desirable if one or more of the parties has a vested interest. They care about the outcome. It matters to them. Maybe there'll be a feeling, again, this gets back to the psychological considerations of lasting impact of conflict. If there may be lingering frustration or animosity of one party towards the others because they didn't really feel like they should lose, they wanted to pursue other creative solutions and they were forced to have to give in, and therefore as a result that creates lingering resentment, that's going to do lasting damage to the relationships that exist on a moving forward basis. So that's when avoidance is inappropriate. So we've talked about each of these four scenarios. When I'm asked to create framework, when I do a consultation with a team, when I go into an organization that's had a lot of change, transformation, chaos, and this was very much the case post-COVID, was you have to have an identification that there's going to be some interpersonal relationship dynamic challenge with conflict. And here are some of the guidelines. Separate people from the problem. Oftentimes, not often, nearly universally, the hook or the danger of conflict, here's where it gets dangerous, is that we equate the person with the problem. We have to, in a conflict resolution framework, understand that there's the issue and then there's the relationship, and we have to separate them. You have to separate them, okay? Remember that it has nothing to do with necessarily just what your intent was, whether you intentionally created or contributed to conflict. It was what the other person's perception of your role was. And so that makes it significantly more challenging. And when we deal with conflict, it's not just us, it's understanding others. And that's when I've said before, emotional intelligence is a driving force. So how do we maybe increase the likelihood that we can bring more sensitivity to this thing? Put yourself in other people's shoes. It's not just sympathy, it's empathy. Trying to the extent possible to understand what the other person is feeling by placing yourself squarely in their situation. And then don't make assumptions. We know about the classic joke about assuming is right. You make an ass out of you and me. So we want to get away from the danger of attempting to often incorrectly interpret what other people's intentions were or what they're thinking. Focus on the interest of each other and the team, not, well, your position is this and mine is this. It always helps to create common ground by moving away from oppositional viewpoints about what positions were taken. You're pro this, you're anti that. And think about common shared interests. It's the most powerful way to think about the most basic human needs. Organizational security, our individual financial and economic well-being, a sense of belonging. Everybody talks about diversity, equity, inclusion, for example, but they fail to understand the sense of belonging that comes from effectively negotiating conflict, right? Looking forward, we're at the end. The calendar says December 24th, 2024, right now. This is an end of year webinar. We have to look forward to the future, that was the past, and this is the present, which doesn't take us backwards. It's got to take us forwards, and we have to be open and clear about what our expectations are when we're attempting to navigate this thing called conflict. So a lot of times my facilitation on a group-based conflict construct is to get into brainstorm what happened, what were the learning outcomes, and then how do we apply that moving forward. But to get there, you've got to remove judgment. And that's hard. Judgment is, I have found you guilty in the court of my mind. But to brainstorm effective solutions in an objective as possible, lacking judgment mindset. We don't judge each other. We assess how we can contribute to greater work and collaboration moving forward. And therefore we can't jump to conclusions. And then we do this mutual gain by talking about shared goals or outcomes. So I hope that you found this very quick webinar on conflict to be meaningful. What are the takeaways? The takeaways observationally from my 15, 16 years of coaching and consulting are this. Conflict is neither good nor bad. Conflict can be a powerful tool to embrace when we understand that there are different situations that dictate different approaches to conflict. But always, the moment that you go from being a solopreneur, you hire your second and thus more third, fourth, fifth employee, conflict is a natural state of existence amongst human beings. And in that light, conflict is not to be avoided, but it's to be embraced. So thank you so much for coming in and checking out the video. Please like the video. And while you're in the Chazen Group YouTube channel, please be sure to subscribe. That supports the work that I'm doing. And if you have any comments about this or other material that's here on the channel, please be sure to share your thoughts and I'll follow up with future training and development videos. Thank you so much.